The footsteps in the woods are getting closer and closer. This may be my last transmission. My name is Father Thomas Berry, and what I'm about to reveal has turned me into a man marked by the Vatican. As the documents burn in the fireplace of this isolated cabin, I must share what I discovered in the secret files on Nazi gold. The truth is darker than anyone could imagine. 3 years ago, while cataloguing documents in the underground archives of the Vatican Bank, I found a sealed room. This smell of mold and secret permeated the air. It was there that I discovered yellowed folders marked 1945, 1948 special transfers. Few know this, but those papers revealed a network of transactions that linked Nazi gold directly to the sacred coffers. 200 million Swiss francs, gold ripped from Jews' dentures in the camps, wedding rings, family heirlooms, all turned into bars that disappeared after the war. The records I held with my own hands show a path that the Vatican has hidden for decades. The plan began in the last months of the Reich. While Berlin burned, trucks transported gold to Switzerland. I can feel the weight of those bars, golden and cold, each carrying the pain of shattered lives. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for Religious Works, operated under the command of figures like Bernardino Nogara, a name you've never heard, but who masterminded one of the biggest money laundering operations in history. The air inside those vaults must have been heavy, permeated with the metallic aroma of gold and the expensive perfume of bankers who turned a blind eye to the origins of that wealth. I urgently need your help. The snow has already completely melted around this cabin, making my position increasingly vulnerable. I hear footsteps every night now, getting closer and closer. I need to find another place to hide, an even more remote refuge. If you know of an isolated place, difficult to access, where I can continue sharing these revelations, leave it in the comments. Describe how to get there, but use codes that only we can understand. I promise I'll mention the name of whoever offers me the best hiding place in my next video, if I manage to record another one. Share this video now before it disappears. The truth about the blood-stained gold cannot die with me in this cabin. Tomorrow, I will take these ashes from the burned documents and scatter them along the path, trying to confuse anyone who is following me. The genius of the scheme was in its simplicity. The gold was entered as anonymous donations for charitable works. Can you feel the perversity in this? Using charity as a disguise to clean up blood. The mechanism worked in 3 steps that I discovered detailed in a red leather notebook that was hidden behind a loose plaque on the wall of the archive. First, the gold was melted again, losing any identifiable mark. The intense heat of the furnaces erased. Evidence and stories. The suffocating odor of molten metal must have permeated the clothes of those involved, their souls stained like their clothes. When I touched those documents, I felt a chill run down my spine, as if the victims' souls were still linked to that damned gold. Second, these new ingots were transferred to Catholic banks in Argentina, Spain, and Portugal, countries that maintained friendly relations with the Nazi regime. The creaking of ships loaded with this cursed cargo cut across the Mediterranean Sea at night. The documents described specific routes, names of captains, precise dates. One of them, the Santa Maria, sailed from Genoa in March 1946 with a cargo registered as medical supplies for missions, a lie so explicit that it made me wonder how many other falsehoods were accepted without question. Third, the money returned to the Vatican as legitimate investments, or was used to finance the escape of war criminals via the famous rat lines. Can you imagine? The sound of the boots of these men fleeing in the dead of night, protected by passports issued by the church itself. I saw copies of these passports. I saw the signatures of the men who authorized them, names you would recognize immediately if I revealed them. In the most shocking document I found, a letter dated December 1947, a Swiss banker reported to his Vatican contact, The special merchandise has been processed as requested. All identification has been removed. Investors in Buenos Aires are satisfied with the quality. Special merchandise. This is how they referred to the gold taken from victims of the Holocaust. Like simple merchandise. Listen. Are you listening to this? Sometimes I think I'm being paranoid, but I know I'm not alone here. Last night, as I was scanning the last few documents to share with you, I saw a reflection in the window. A figure stood among the trees, watching. When I opened the door, I only found fresh footprints that disappeared into the darkness of the forest. My superiors realized something was wrong when I started asking questions about these transfers. First, there were subtle warnings. Some areas of the archive are not for theological exploration, Father Thomas. Then I was transferred to a different department, away from the financial records. Finally, I found my desk overturned. Documents I had sorted, gone. The night I decided to escape with the evidence I managed to gather was the scariest night of my life. The smell of incense from the afternoon masses still wafted through the halls as I used my key to enter the archives one last time. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my racing heart and the soft rustle of papers being placed in my briefcase. I'm risking everything to share this with you. My position in the church, my security, possibly my life. The snow is melting faster than I expected. I see the earth starting to appear in dark patches around the cabin. My invisibility is fading along with the protective white of the landscape. I need a new refuge, somewhere as remote as this, but where I can continue my work. If you know of a place like this, an abandoned cabin, a mountain shelter, anywhere away from roads and prying eyes, leave your suggestion in the comments. Describe how to get there using references that only we would understand. Do not use real city names, but codes. I promise that if I manage to get to the next hiding place, I will. Mention the name of whoever helped me in my next videos. The person who offers the best refuge will have their name coded in my next revelations. It's the only way I can say thank you while I'm in this situation. The most disturbing thing was not discovering the mechanism, but the names signed on the documents. Senior Vatican officials, cardinals close to the Pope, people who celebrated masses in the morning and signed transfers of Nazi gold in the afternoon. The 1946 memo I found looks around nervously. It has signatures that would make you question everything about the post-war sanctity of the church. I can't reveal those names now. It would be like signing my death warrant. But I found something even more disturbing attached to that memo. A detailed, meticulous list cataloging the origin of each gold bar. Not just values and weights, but specific locations from where they were confiscated. Frankfurt collection, Budapest acquisition, Warsaw recovery, cold euphemisms for the systematic looting of the assets of entire Jewish families. The room grew colder when I read those names. My breath condensed in the air as my fingers trembled holding those papers. The exact moment I realized the magnitude of what I had in my hands was like a crushing weight on my shoulders. The silence of that underground archive was broken only by the sound of my racing heart, beating against my ribs as if trying to escape that terrible truth. A 1947 internal report described in technical detail the process of sanitizing gold. They described how small personal objects, wedding rings, pocket watches, family brooches, were melted down in secret facilities in Switzerland. The document explicitly mentioned that certain items needed special processing to remove residual organic materials. Do you understand what this means? They were talking about human remains still attached to some objects. Gold teeth ripped out of victims in such a hurry that still contained... Deep breath. I can't even complete that sentence. One of the documents I managed to copy before fleeing contained a particularly revealing passage. It was a letter from a Swiss banker to a cardinal whose name is coded only as NR. The letter said, "Your Eminence, the charitable procedures have been successfully completed. Assets have been purified and distributed as per your wishes. Our commissions have been transferred to designated accounts. I congratulate Your Eminence for the foresight to use church channels for this delicate operation. No other institution could move such amounts across borders without arousing suspicion." When I questioned my superiors about similar documents I had found, I felt the immediate change in the atmosphere around me. The warmth of support and friendship that once surrounded me froze into distrust and vigilance. Looks that were once welcoming became calculating and distant. Colleagues with whom I shared meals daily began to avoid my table in the cafeteria. Doors that were previously open to me began to close, one by one, isolating me within the very institution to which I dedicated my life. I noticed that folders started disappearing from the archives. One by one, the evidence was removed during the night. The gentle slide of drawers being emptied while the Vatican slept. The official order was reorganization of the archive for digital preservation. But I knew the truth. They were erasing history, burning the bridges that linked the church to Nazi gold. In March of last year, I was called to Cardinal Vignano's office. He did not mention the documents directly, but his message was clear. "Father Thomas, your curiosity about historical administrative matters is hampering your pastoral work. Perhaps it is time for us to consider a transfer to a rural parish in Sicily." It wasn't an invitation, it was a warning. That same night, returning to my room, I noticed that someone had searched my things. It was subtle, a drawer not quite closed, books in a slightly different order, but I noticed it. That's when I decided I needed to run away and take with me what I had discovered. Subscribe to this channel now. This is not just another story about church conspiracies. These are real documents that I held in my own hands, hard evidence that threatens to expose one of the biggest money laundering operations in history. Each person who receives this message becomes a guardian of this truth. When more people know these facts, the less likely it will be that I will simply disappear like others who have tried to expose Vatican secrets. Become part of this mission. Click on the registration button. The truth cannot die in this isolated cabin. To this day, when reparations lawsuits arise, the Vatican Bank claims a lack of evidence. Of course, there is a lack of evidence. I saw with my own eyes the process of eliminating them. In 1998, when families of Holocaust survivors sued Swiss banks, I requested access to documents related to that period. Do you know what they told me? These records were destroyed in a flood in 1952. Lie. I saw them in 2020, intact, stored in waterproof folders in the deepest levels of the archive. The families of Holocaust victims continue to wait for justice while the gold that belonged to their grandparents and parents finances works and investments. Their pain remains like an open wound, while the vaults remain locked and silent, protected by centuries of tradition and power. When I touch these yellowed pages of the documents I managed to save, I feel as if I can hear the echoes of the voices of those who lost everything, not just their lives, but the truth about the final fate of their possessions. This is my last week at this cabin. The snow is melting faster than I expected, leaving me increasingly vulnerable. Over the last few days, the strange noises at night have been increasing. Footsteps that come closer and then move away, always in a smaller and smaller circle around the cabin. Lights between the trees that are not natural, small flashes like from communications equipment. Yesterday, I found marks on the back door, as if someone had tried to pick the lock. During the early hours of the morning, I woke up to a strange smell, the same incense used in ceremonies at the Vatican. It wasn't a coincidence. They are sending a message. They know exactly where I am, and they are playing with me like a cat with a mouse before the final attack. The most alarming thing is what I discovered this morning. Near the cabin, about 100 meters west, I found an object half buried in the melting snow, a small inverted silver crucifix. It was identical to those used by the Order of St. Gregory during private ceremonies in the Vatican. It wasn't left by chance. It was placed strategically for me to find. A veiled threat, a silent reminder of the power I'm fighting against. The ingenuity of the washing scheme still impresses me today, not because of its complexity, but because of its audacity. They used the holiness of the Church as a perfect shield. Who would question generous donations to humanitarian causes? The cynicism is so deep that it is nauseating. In the secret meetings I discovered, documented, those involved called the project Operation Redemption, an absolute perversion of the religious concept. I found a memo dated July 1947 that detailed the second phase of the operation, the international transfer. Ships didn't just transport physical gold. That would be too risky. They created an ingenious system of numbered certificates, each representing a certain amount of gold stored in vaults in Switzerland. These papers were much easier to carry and hide. An ordinary priest carrying religious documents in his luggage would never arouse suspicion at post-war borders. I vividly remember the day I found the detailed route records. I was alone in the archive. The only sound was the old-fashioned air conditioning and the occasional creak of metal shelves. The folder was hidden behind a row of seemingly insignificant ledgers. When I opened it, the smell of old paper hit me like a wave, along with the feeling of touching something forbidden. Maps showed red lines crossing the Mediterranean, connecting specific points: Genoa to Barcelona, Naples to Lisbon, Marseille to Tangier. Each route had a religious code name: Camino de Santiago, Route of Calvary, Crossing of Moses. Even in this, they profaned the sacred. The third phase was the most insidious, the reintroduction of money into the legitimate financial system. Here, the Vatican Bank demonstrated a perverse genius. They created Catholic charitable foundations in the receiving countries, especially in Latin America. These organizations received the gold or its cash equivalent as anonymous donations to help war refugees. Then part of these funds was invested in properties, businesses, and, ironically, in the reconstruction of churches destroyed during the war. In the folder coded as Divine Providence, I found records of investments made with that money. Luxury hotels in Buenos Aires, wineries in Spain, real estate in Lisbon. All generate substantial profits to this day, fortunes built on the unspeakable suffering of Holocaust victims. The fruits of these investments continue to flow into the Vatican's coffers, apparently legitimate, washed by time and layers of shell companies. The most disturbing document I found was a 1952 report that took stock of the success of the operation. Written in Latin to further limit who could read it, it coolly described, resources recovered from European conflicts have been completely integrated into the assets of the Holy See, with no detectable traces of their origin. Providence has blessed our efforts with complete discretion. Providence. They dared to attribute their criminal scheme to God. In an attachment to that report, there was something that made me vomit when I read it. A detailed list of Nazi war criminals transported to safety via rat lines, the escape routes organized with the help of church figures. These were not just minor names, but high-ranking SS officers, concentration camp administrators, doctors who performed experiments on prisoners. Next to each name was the amount donated to ensure their safe passage, a market for souls, with prices varying depending on the magnitude of their crimes. The most shocking thing was to discover that some of these criminals not only escaped justice, they were given complete new identities, many of them created using Catholic parish records of children who had died during the war. Imagine the horror. innocent victims of the conflict having their identities usurped to protect their tormentors. One of these men, whose code name was Archangel, was given not only false documents, but a position at a Catholic university in Argentina. He had supervised experiments on children at Auschwitz. The cruelty of the system leaves me breathless even now as I reveal this to you. Think about it. The same gold ripped from the fingers of concentration camp victims was used to finance the escape of their torturers, all under the protective cloak of the church. The perfect cycle of injustice, sealed with the papal seal. Did you hear that? I need to check the windows. I'll be back in a moment. I'm still safe for now, but I don't know for how long. The snow continues to melt, exposing my hiding spot a little more every hour. I see signs of movement among the trees more often now. These are not wild animals. They are methodical, calculated, human movements. I don't know how much longer I have to share this information. My laptop is connected to a solar battery that only runs for a few hours a day. The internet signal that I was able to capture is weak and unstable. Every video I post could be my last. That's why I need you. You are my safety net, my guarantee that these truths will not die with me if the worst happens. Every video I post could be my last. That's why I need you. You are my safety net, my guarantee that these truths will not die with me if the worst happens. The most incriminating document I found, the one that made my decision to flee, inevitable, was hidden inside an ancient, uncatalogued book of Psalms, forgotten in a rarely visited section of the archive. It was as if a greater force had guided my hands to that shelf on that particular day. The book had a small irregularity on the spine that caught my attention. When I opened it, I discovered that the center pages had been cut away, creating a secret compartment. Inside was an envelope sealed with red wax, the seal partially broken by age. Inside the envelope, I found a single typewritten yellowed sheet of paper dated October 3rd, 1946. It was a direct communication between Cardinal Giovanni Montini, who would later become Pope Paul VI, and the Swiss banker François Dupont. The content was so explicit, so unambiguous, that my hands shook as I read it. The cardinal not only knew the origin of the gold, but gave specific instructions on how it should be processed to avoid any association with its victims. He wrote, and I'm quoting exactly, "Materials received from the Eastern Territories must be treated with the utmost discretion. Any personal identification or religious markings must be completely eliminated before proceeding. The Holy See cannot have official knowledge of the provenance of these goods, although their contribution to our work is invaluable in these difficult times." Invaluable. This word haunts me. Human suffering transformed into an invaluable contribution. When I read that letter, I felt as if the very ground beneath my feet had disappeared. My whole world, my faith, my devotion to the church, everything was shaken in seconds. The man I had revered as a holy father had been an accomplice in one of the greatest crimes in history. The file room seemed to spin around me as I held that paper. The air became heavy, suffocating. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the blood pulsing in my ears. It was at that moment that I realized there was no going back. I couldn't just return that document to its paper tomb and continue my life as if nothing had happened. Truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. There were other names in the letter and in related documents I later found: cardinals, bishops, directors of Catholic banks, Christian politicians in positions of post-war power, an intricate network of complicity that extended far beyond the walls of the Vatican. They created a system so perfect, so impenetrable, that it worked in plain sight for decades without being discovered. One of the most calculated, aspects of the scheme was the way they used the nascent Cold War as additional cover. In internal memos, the operations leaders instructed, any questions about the origin of the funds must be diverted as communist propaganda against the church. It was the perfect alibi in those times of ideological paranoia. Any accusation could be dismissed as an atheistic attack on the faith, and it worked. The few courageous journalists or investigators who came close to the truth were systematically discredited, labeled as communist or anti-religious. Some simply disappeared from circulation, transferred to remote positions if they were members of the clergy, or victims of accidents if they were civilians investigating on their own. In the records I managed to save, I found mention of at least 3 priests who had asked similar questions to mine over the decades. One was diagnosed with nervous exhaustion and sent to a health retreat run by a religious order in Switzerland. He was never heard from again. Another was found dead in his room, a suicide according to official reports, although close friends insisted he showed no signs of depression. The third simply disappeared during a research trip to South America. His case was briefly investigated and then filed as desertion of clerical duties. It makes me think about my own destiny. With every noise outside, every branch that creaks under the weight of the melting snow, I wonder, is it now? Did they arrive? The truth is, I'm terrified, but I can't stop. Not after everything I found out. Leave a like on this video. Not by me. I probably won't be here to see the numbers grow. Do it for historical truth, for the victims whose gold was stolen twice. First by the Nazis, then by the institution that was supposed to represent Christ's compassion on earth. Each like is like a little flame, keeping this story lit, preventing it from being buried in the shadows again. The silence about these crimes lasted decades because it relied on the overwhelming power of an ancient institution. Many Holocaust victims were doubly robbed of their lives and of their posthumous justice. Entire families exterminated in the camps had no survivors to seek reparations. Perfect for the scheme architects, no complainers, no problems. The documents I found suggest that approximately 30% of the gold processed by the Vatican Bank in that period came from victims with no known survivors. It was referred to internally as risk-free material, another perverse way of describing the looting of entire families wiped out. There is something deeply disturbing about seeing the bureaucratic, technical, and dispassionate language used to describe this process in official documents. Memos detailing the melting of wedding rings and heirloom jewelry use terms such as batch processing and purification of contaminated material, complete dehumanization, the transformation of personal tragedies into simple banking transactions reveals the true nature of evil, not only violent and explicit, but also cold, calculating, dressed in the cloak of institutional respectability. One specific document left me particularly shaken. It was an accounting sheet detailing the efficiency of the casting process. It listed precisely how much gold was lost in the process of removing impurities, including small precious stones, personal engravings, and most gruesomely, fragments of bones and teeth. The smelter manager requested better equipment to increase the recovery rate. The complete lack of recognition of the humanity behind those items is what makes this so monstrous. Last night was the worst. Around 2 a.m., I heard distinct footsteps circling the structure. They weren't animals, they were deliberate, calculated movements. In a moment, the porch floorboards creaked, as if someone was testing their weight. I lay completely still in the darkness, barely breathing, my heart beating so loudly I feared it might be heard. After almost an hour, the sounds disappeared, but I didn't sleep anymore. This morning, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Fresh footprints that reached the kitchen window. Someone stood there, watching me as I slept. Even more disturbing, a small symbol drawn in the condensation on the window, an inverted triangle with a cross in the center. It is the symbol used by the Vatican's internal security section, known only to a few. They are sending a clear message. They know exactly where I am. To fully understand the extent of this cover-up, we need to go back to 1998, when a wave of lawsuits against Swiss banks began to gain traction in American courts. Holocaust survivors and families of victims demanded access to dormant bank accounts and compensation for stolen gold. What few know is that, behind the scenes, the Vatican went into crisis mode. I was working at that time as a junior assistant to a cardinal whose name I must omit for security reasons. I vividly remember an emergency meeting called in a rarely used room at the back of the Vatican complex. Elderly cardinals and bank directors gathered with grave expressions. I was not allowed to enter, but my role required me to wait outside with documents that could be requested. The door wasn't completely closed, and I could hear fragments of the conversation. A cardinal, his voice trembling with anxiety, asked, "What if the lawsuits against the Swiss banks lead to an investigation that reaches into our records?" A banker responded with disturbing calm, "Your Eminence, don't worry. Operation Archive Purification was completed in 1972. Any direct links have been removed." Another younger cardinal interjected, "But there are still the secondary records, the transfers to the dioceses in South America and the subsequent investments." It was at that moment that I heard something that I will never forget. A man whose voice I didn't recognize said coldly, "The history of the Church is long, and we have learned for centuries that some documents need to be recontextualized. Historical archives will undergo accelerated natural deterioration in the coming months." Suppressed laughter followed this macabre comment. When I returned to my small apartment that night, I couldn't sleep. Those words haunted me. I was young, idealistic. I had entered the priesthood believing in the sacred mission of the Church, and now I had inadvertently become a witness to a conspiracy to destroy historical evidence. What disturbed me most was how casually they talked about it, as if it were just another day of administrative work, and not the deliberate obliteration of the truth. Over the next few weeks, I noticed unusual activity in the files. Entire areas were declared closed for restoration. Conservation experts I had never seen before appeared with special credentials that surpassed even the access of senior cardinals. Boxes of documents were removed at night, supposedly for specialist fungal treatment. Many never returned. Only years later, when I was promoted to a position that gave me access to more restricted sections of the archives, did I begin to realize the massive scale of this cover-up operation. There were obvious gaps in series of documents, numberings that skipped, entire volumes missing from collections. Even more revealing were the replaced documents, visibly newer pages inserted into older files with sanitized content. The most egregious case I found was Ledger 47B, an accounting book from the period 1946-1948 that, according to the catalogue, was supposed to document international donations for post-war reconstruction. When I finally got access to it, after 3 denied requests, I discovered that it had been completely rewritten. The paper, the binding, everything looked authentic at first glance. But upon closer examination, it was clearly a sophisticated forgery. The ink did not show the oxidation expected for documents from that time. The entries detailed small donations from parishes across Europe, a complete fiction created to replace what I suspected were records of Nazi gold transfers. In 2001, when a group of lawyers representing Jewish families attempted to obtain documents from the Vatican relating to Holocaust gold, the official response was surprisingly swift and definitive. After extensive searching of our archives, we found no documentation relating to the aforementioned transactions. I was working in the archives that day and saw firsthand how the extensive research consisted of consulting only the already sanitized records. deliberately avoiding areas that might contain relevant information. The cynicism of the operation left me increasingly disturbed. On one occasion, I overheard two senior archives staff commenting on a particularly incriminating document that needed to disappear. One of them said, laughing, "We'll put him in section X, the one that had the sprinkler system accident next month." They planned a destruction of documents disguised as a water accident. It wasn't just the distant past they were protecting. In 2010, as more Holocaust-related cases emerged, I saw firsthand how the Vatican Bank mobilized a team of elite international lawyers. At a preparatory meeting I attended as a translator, my knowledge of German was necessary. The strategy was outlined bluntly. Our main argument will be the lack of direct documentary evidence. No paper, no case. A Swiss lawyer present at the meeting asked, with obvious concern, "What if someone within the church decides to speak? Someone who has seen the original documents?" The cardinal presiding over the meeting responded with a cold smile. "Our employees are extremely loyal. Furthermore, any allegation without documentary evidence would simply be one person's word against an institution with 2,000 years of history. Who do you think the world would believe?" Those words ring in my head now, as I hide in this remote cabin. They were right about the difficulty of proving something without documents. That's why I worked so hard to gather what I could before I fled. Copies, photographs of records, my own detailed notes. It's not everything, not even most of it, but it's something. A small light of truth against a vast, organized darkness. The families of Holocaust victims never received full justice. The lawsuits against Swiss banks resulted in some financial settlements, but the Vatican's role remained largely untouched, protected by its unique position as a sovereign state and religious institution. Evidence that could establish direct responsibility has been methodically erased, rewritten, or locked away in files so secret that they officially do not even exist. Think about the horror of this. Descendants of people whose gold was stolen twice, first by the Nazis, then by the Church, visit the Vatican as tourists admiring its wealth and splendor, unaware that some of that gold in the frescoes, chalices, and ornaments may have come from the wedding rings of their own murdered grandparents. One of the most revealing documents I managed to copy before I fled was a 1990 internal study that calculated that approximately 6% of the Vatican's current financial assets could be traced back to the 1945-1948 period of special transfers. That doesn't seem like much until you calculate the value, billions of euros, that were never recognized, let alone returned to the families who are their rightful owners. In 2018, just 3 years ago, I had my last direct interaction with this ongoing cover-up. An external researcher, a respected historian specializing in the post-war period, requested access to certain financial documents for a book he was writing. I was assigned to assist you, in effect, to monitor and limit your access. The instructions I received were explicit. Only provide documents from the approved list. If he requests something outside this list, tell him it was water damaged or under restoration. For 2 weeks, I guided that poor man through a carefully constructed maze of half-truths and irrelevant documents. He left frustrated, but convinced he had looked at everything available. What he didn't know was that just 2 doors away from where he worked, there was a room full of documents on exactly the topic he was researching, including direct correspondence about gold transfers. The guilt of this particular episode consumed me. I started making secret copies of documents whenever I could. It was risky. Security cameras monitor the archives, and removing any material is strictly prohibited. I developed techniques to temporarily block cameras, pretending to adjust lights or move shelves. I used a hidden smartphone to quickly photograph pages while supposedly organizing them. One night, while working late, I was almost discovered by the head of archives security. He unexpectedly entered the room where I was photographing a particularly incriminating folder. Out of pure reflex, I dropped the folder, scattering papers across the floor. While apologizing profusely and collecting documents, I managed to slip my phone back into my pocket. It was close, but his eyes revealed suspicion. I think it was from that moment on that I began to be more closely monitored. 2 weeks later, I noticed small changes in my apartment when I came home from work. Things out of place, as if someone had done a quick search. My computer appeared to have been accessed. I began leaving small, imperceptible marks, a hair on the door, a book in a specific position, to confirm my suspicion. Invariably, these signals were altered when I returned. That's when I decided I needed to escape. Using medical leave as a pretext, I disappeared with only the essentials and all the evidence I had collected. Through contacts I had made over the years with investigative journalists, I established a route to this remote hideout. I knew it would only be a matter of time before they found me, but I hoped I would have enough time to share what I know. And now here I am, surrounded by melting snow, with increasingly clear signs that they are approaching. I know too much. I've seen too many documents. In the world of controlled information, I am what they fear most, a witness with evidence. I'm not being paranoid when I say my life is in danger. Others before me who tried to talk about this disappeared or suffered convenient accidents. 3 days ago, I found a symbol carved into the bark of a nearby tree, a stylized eagle holding a key. It's the signal from Sodalitium Pianum, a Vatican internal security group supposedly disbanded in 1921, but which many believe continues to operate secretly to protect the church from internal threats. If they really are involved, my situation is even more dangerous than I imagined. Last night I heard the distinct sound of communications equipment, radios being tuned, the distinctive click of coded transmissions. They established a perimeter around the cabin. They are just watching for now, perhaps waiting for final orders or an ideal opportunity to act. The snow continues to melt. The circle is closing. I need your help more than ever. This is not just my fight. It is a battle for historical truth, for justice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves, whose possessions have been stolen, and whose memory has been doubly betrayed. If any of you know of a truly remote place I could hide out, an abandoned cabin in the mountains, a forgotten forest shelter, any location far from roads and watchful eyes, leave a description in the comments. Do not use real names or exact coordinates that can be easily tracked. Speak in terms that only another human would understand, but that surveillance algorithms might not immediately detect. Speak in terms that only another human would understand, but that surveillance algorithms could not immediately detect. I will check each suggestion personally, only moving at night to minimize the risk of being seen. I promise that the person who offers me the refuge that saves my life and this mission will have their name indicated in the code in the next videos, if I can make them. Now I need to explain something crucial about the documents I saved. I created a security system. The most incriminating evidence was digitized and stored on multiple encrypted devices. Some are already in the hands of confident people who don't know exactly what they have, just that they must disclose the contents in case something happens to me. It is my security of life, or at least the security of the truth that I carry. One of these devices contains what it calls the Cardinal Archive, named not for clerical rank, but because it is the cardinal point, the center of all. Evidence includes full names, data, values, and specific routes, the identity of every church official involved, every complicit banker, every war criminal who received protection in exchange for gold. It's protected by a password that only 2 people in the world know, me and an investigative journalist whose name I obviously can't reveal. Last night, I had the most disturbing of omens. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a smell that would be overwhelming anywhere. The same incense used exclusively in the Sistine Chapel during private papal ceremonies. a rare incense made with a formula kept secret for centuries. It was impossible for it to be there naturally, miles from any church, in the middle of the night. It was left as a warning, a signature, a silent message. We know exactly who you are. More worryingly, when I inspected the exterior of the cabin at dawn, I found a symbol drawn in the mud left by the melting snow, a key crossed with a sword, the emblem of the Custody of Papal Secrets Division, a department so secret that its existence is officially denied. Only those at the highest levels of the Vatican position know of its operation. This means that my case has reached the highest levels. It's not just ordinary security guards who haunt me. They're the experts at eliminating problems without leaving a trace. As a precaution, I changed the location of some physical documents that I kept with me. There is a hollow tree about a meter from the cabin, towards the northeast. I covered the papers with waterproof wax and hid them inside. If something happens to me before I can escape, at least this evidence might survive to be discovered one day. The most important document, the one that directly links the Vatican Bank to our Nazi with irrefutable evidence, is hidden in a way that no one would think to look for. Inside this cabin itself, remove a small floorboard from under my bed and hide the plastic-sealed document inside the cavity. If the walls of this cabin could talk, they would tell not just my story, but the story of thousands of victims whose possessions were stolen twice. As I mentioned earlier, some of these Nazi criminals didn't just escape justice, they were given new lives completely financed by their victims' gold. One of these men, I'll call him Surgeon for my own safety, was a notorious Auschwitz doctor who performed experiments on twin children. Through rat lines organized with clerical help, he received a new identity as a respected doctor in an Argentine city. The documents I found show that he donated 47 kilos of gold to guarantee his passage and new life. Gold that we now know where it came from. The most shocking thing is that Surgeon not only thrived in his new identity, he became personal physician to powerful church figures in South America. Photos in one of the files show him being decorated by bishops, participating in Catholic charity events, completely integrated into South American Christian high society. He died peacefully in 1979, without ever facing justice. His funeral held in a cathedral attended by church dignitaries. The cynicism runs so deep that it makes me question everything I believe in. How could a man who had injected chemicals into children's eyes to see if he could change their color receive the last rites and be buried with honors in consecrated ground? The answer lies in the documents I found. He stole his way to redemption with blood-stained gold, and the church knowingly accepted payment. Wait, I heard something. Sounds of footsteps approaching the cabin, branches breaking. There's someone out there now. I can see a shadow moving between the trees. He's not an animal. He's very methodical, very deliberate. They are approaching the cabin. I need to finish this transmission quickly. If something happens to me, know that the main documents are safe. The truth will survive, even if I don't. Keep sharing these videos. Download them before they are removed. Spread this information. History has a way of evolving to the fore, no matter how long it takes. My God, they're here. I can hear someone on the porch. I'm going to have to hang up now and try to escape through the back. There's a passage I prepared, a makeshift tunnel under the kitchen cabinet that leads to the forest. Don't forget to share it here. Look for tracks in my previous videos. I left coded coordinates that, when matched, will reveal the location of one of the copies of the evidence. It is hidden. They are trying to get in. I only have seconds. Remember, Nazi gold still funds parts of the Vatican operation to this day. The families of the victims deserve to know the truth. Look for a man named Sound of Something Breaking. He has the second part of I need to go now. If I survive, I'll try to make contact again somehow. Look for signs in the comments. I will use the code name Guardian of Truth. If you see that name, that's me trying to communicate. Pray for me, but not on their clothes. Pray under the open sky where God can truly hear without interference. U10, the Cardinal Archive, is not there.